Good morning. I'll give you a moment to set up there.
Okay, I brought everything in the kitchen sink apparently.
That's good.
Yes.
And is there a light on your microphone there? I want to make sure that we're
Yes,
turned
it's
on.
green.
Okay, when you're ready, if you'll just state your name and then you can give us your comments.
Okay, my name is Suzanne Williamson, and I live about 3.5 miles away from the Port Neches TPC Group plant that recently exploded. My whole house shook, and I jumped out of bed because I thought a car had hit my home. I now have cracked sheetrock, structural damage in my attic, windows that won't open, and that's 3.5 miles away from my home. We had to have the air quality in our home monitored after our whole family was feeling the effects of butadiene, headaches, nausea, dizziness, and stomach issues. That test revealed VOCs at 0.6 parts per million. At 0.5 parts per million, we would be required to wear a respirator if we were working in a local plant. There are 11 schools within 4-mile radius of this out-of-date, asbestos-filled plant. 2 of those are within walking distance. All of these schools need continuous monitoring systems at each and every school. I brought this picture to show you. My son goes to this high school, and he's on this football team. As you can see, TPC is in the background. There are about 5,000 or more people in the stands of this football game. And Lion Elastomers, who is next on the docket, is also in this picture. TPC Group's new slogan is, for this preventable disaster, that we're working to make it right. My opinion is, seriously, they should have made it right from the beginning. They caused a completely preventable explosion due to a lack of maintenance because they cared more about their profits. Interview the workers and the operators of the plant, and you will find out what really happened. It's no secret. They had a major EPA violation in 2017 and agreed to no less than $275,000 worth of mitigation projects, including a fence line monitoring system for butadiene. To my understanding, that's never been done. The EPA has them listed as a high priority violator of the Clean Air Act. They've been out of compliance for 12 out of 12 quarters. That's 3 years. If I, as a private citizen, had repeatedly broken the law for 3 years, I would be in jail right now. But TPC keeps on breaking laws. The EPA assessed penalties of $102,000 against TPC from 2016 to 2017. And highly concerning, basically, we have the fox guarding the hen house. CTEH is hired by TPC for its risk management and litigation services. It's the primary monitoring entity for this entire situation. CTEH's toxicologist, Dr. Angela Perez, said in a press conference, "We are setting the levels." Then she said the EPA and TCEQ are agreeing to the levels. There is a huge incentive for CTEH to underreport. CTEH is paid by TPC. Common sense tells me that their chemical studies and samples are designed to meet their clients' goals.
That's time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williamson.
No problem.
And forgive me if I mangle the name, but our next commenter is Letitia Ablaza. Is Letitia here? Letitia Ablaza? Okay. Moving on. Mr. John Beard.
He's on his way. Oh, he's here.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. To the chairman and the commissioner, and also the chief clerk of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and all of you here. As you probably know, I am here, just arrived from Port Arthur, Texas, just adjacent to the TCP facility that had the explosion and fire. I'm here representing not only myself, but the communities at large in the Port Arthur area, as through my organization, the Port Arthur Community Action Network. And this is what we would like to say to you. We'd like for you to know that even though there are immediate areas that were affected by this, the effects were much farther than where they were. And in regard to your assessment of fines, let me say this, that you cannot make these fines be a slap on the wrist. Those fines must be punitive, and they must send a warning to TCP and other companies that you, as an organization, and we as people will not tolerate their continued pollution of our environment and the very air that we breathe. They put our lives and our health at very serious risk. A slap on the wrist, a meager fine, is nothing. It's, matter of fact, the course of doing business. They don't see it as anything but that. I have 38 years in the plant, in petrochemical business, in operations and in maintenance. And one of the things we were always taught is that there are small events that lead up to major events. This explosion was a major event. I live over 7 miles from that facility, and it shook my house. And a number of people I know that were closer have damages to their homes. And quite a few people were affected by the plume from that fire, which stretched as far as you could see to the horizon where the ground meets the sky. You have to enforce these laws. You have to inspect these plants. You have to, for our sake and our lives and our children's sake, make sure that these penalties send a message. And that message is that you and we will not tolerate them to continue to pollute. As you heard just a minute ago, they're a gross violator. So it's obvious that fines and penalties aren't working. It would be better that they not go back into business or work at all than to continue to have problems that affect the community so seriously. And in closing, I'd like to ask you to consider this. You don't have refineries here in this part of the country, but we do. We are surrounded by them. And we are bombarded every minute of every day with, as Sting would say, every breath you take. So keep that in mind when you think about these fines, and think about what if it were your children or you that had to breathe carcinogenic air, that had to breathe air that makes you so sick that you have to go to the doctor and seek medical aid and attention. Think about that, just the very fact of breathing. There are a number of people in my community that are under extreme stress. They have respiratory illnesses.
That's
They
time.
have asthma and other such illnesses. But thank you for your consideration, and please make those fines work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beard. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Fred Vernon. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
If you'll state your name, and then we'd be happy to hear your comments.
Sure. My name is Fred Vernon, and I'm from Port Arthur, Texas. I live about 2.5 miles away from the plant, TPC plant that exploded. I can recall, I want to share with everybody kind of what happened to myself, my family, my wife, my baby girl, when that plant exploded. Midnight, about midnight, 1 o'clock, the house shook. Several hours later, my mom and my wife, Wafat, were cooking Thanksgiving dinner in preparation on Wednesday, getting ready for the meal. Then there was a second explosion. That's where the air quality got really nasty, really bad. The smoke got really dark. And this was several hours before a mandatory evacuation was issued by the county judge. I remember grabbing my baby girl and putting a blanket over her head, Sanaya, and she began to throw up and vomit as we brought her outside that day. Myself, I began to vomit as I'm getting her strapped into the car seat. My wife getting the items that she could from the house. As we left all the yams and turkey that we were cooking, we just abandoned that and left that in the house. And the stories like that go on and on for several families around Southeast Texas. And I thank Public Citizen for coming down to our community and speaking with us and telling us about the opportunities to come here to share our stories. And what I'm asking is that you guys, when y'all are making y'all's decision on how to find or how to, I guess, reprimand TPC for what they've done to the community and their irresponsibility, consistent and blatant irresponsibility within the state of Texas and within our community, I ask that you make it stick, you make it hurt. They're owned by a private equity firm. They've got money. And $275,000 for a fence is not a lot of money. $200,000 here and there is not a lot of money. Make it hurt and make them understand that irresponsibility and blatant disrespect for the laws and rules and regulations that this board puts forth on a state level and what the EPA puts forth on a national level will not be tolerated at any stance in any circumstance. I speak for myself. I believe I speak for my community. Again, I thank public citizens for giving us this opportunity. And I plead with you, board, please make it stick, make it hurt, make them understand that this will not be tolerated. I'm pro-industry. I was a welder that helped me put me through school, through college, and but I'm pro-responsible industry. I'm pro-safe industry. And I love the state of Texas, but guys like TPC, they shouldn't be here. So I ask that you enforce the stiffest penalties and make them understand that this is not a game. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vernon. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Todd Perkins. If you're here, Mr. Perkins? No? Thank you. Mr. Adrienne Shelly? Good morning.
Morning. Thank you, Commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Adrienne Shelly with Public Citizen. And, the most important statements that you will hear today are going to be from the people who have firsthand experience of this most recent incident with TPC Group. So I want to just, affirm everything that they say and want us all to recognize that it really is a good opportunity for us to hear these firsthand accounts. It's not easy for people to come up here, to make these sacrifices of their time to be here. And so we want to respect that. Beyond that, we know that the enforcement action that's in front of you guys today is not related to the explosion. We know that there have been a number of other enforcement actions just this year, and that there are other pending matters with this facility in front of the TCEQ. We know that there have been something like 36 administrative orders over the history of TPC Group's operations at both its Houston and its Port Neches facilities. It's typically getting fines on the order of a few tens of thousands of dollars. There was a $200,000 fine earlier this year. The evidence before us shows that these fines are not an adequate deterrent. The company continues to violate. But this company does have some successes in the past, and I want to lift those up. Back in 2005, Mayor Bill White's Air Pollution Task Force in Houston identified TPC Group as the #1 emitter of butadiene and actually convinced the company, let's say, to enter into a voluntary emissions reduction agreement. It put a continuous fence line monitoring system around its Houston facility for butadiene. And in just 6 months' time, it achieved an 80% reduction in butadiene. It saved itself in butadiene emissions off-site of the facility. It saved hundreds of thousands of dollars for the facility. It paid for the fence line monitoring system. I remember years ago, Maurice Texter was at TPC Group back then, and she told everyone how successful that had been for the company and what a good financial move it had been, not to mention how good it was for the community. We just heard that in 2017, the Port Neches facility entered into a consent agreement with EPA that required them to install fence line monitoring for butadiene. If they haven't done that, then they need to. And if they did, and they acted on that data, they would probably see those same emissions reductions. It happened in their Houston facility in 2005, 2006. The company has shown that it will respond to aggressive enforcement. Bill White used some coercive tactics to get them to enter into that agreement. You all have that opportunity now, maybe not with this fine today, but the opportunity is there before you. So let's take advantage of it.
Thank you, Mr. Shelley.
Thank you.
We'll hear from Ms. Stephanie Thomas. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Stephanie Thomas. I work with Public Citizen, and I'm based in Houston, Texas. Today, I'm actually bringing comments from people who have been impacted by the TPC event. So Mr. Perkins, who was unable to join us, he sent me a message this morning, and he says, the TPC explosion was a godsend warning that it didn't take any lives. Safety agencies need to interact with employees that know what's going on, not management, which can lie about what's going on. Transparency and accountability is not going to happen with all the nepotism. I have seen the problem explode in the last 15 years. It almost cost me my life multiple times. He is a petrochemical worker. Some additional comments that I'd like to share with you from Miss Mary Ham. She says, I was evacuated from Imelda, staying at my sister's house when this happened. Everyone here has had headaches and nausea. My bright green Jeep got covered in soot. Who knows what is in that substance? These refineries play the waiting game knowing it will be cheaper for them to clean up than provide safety measures, or so they think. We need to make it where it is unthinkable for them to not do everything in their power to prevent these events. From Ms. Pearl Holmes, this explosion was horrifying and disturbed my peace of mind tremendously. I have asthma, and every time this happens, I get so sick. This was horrible. From Mr. Andrew Austin. In addition, I would like to submit that this facility did not have any alarms in place before the explosion. We hear test alarms every Wednesday, but absolutely nothing the early morning of the explosion. I can verify this because I was awake 20 minutes before the explosion happened, changing my 6-month-old baby girl. I was walking back to our room, stepped foot in our doorway with our baby, and witnessed the flash, then horrific explosion that blew out our bedroom windows, causing us to immediately panic. We felt the shockwave through our body. My wife, still in bed, screamed, thinking our house got hit with a tornado. Confused, terrified, and panicked, we scrambled to get a few things together to leave as quickly as possible. My wife's leg was struck by a piece of glass that caused an open wound that bled profusely. All we could do was hurry up and leave, not knowing if this was going to be a chain of events. I assure you that I felt death was upon us, an absolutely terrifying feeling that I hope no one ever has to experience. This is not simply about air quality after the fact. This is about holding the company liable for their negligent actions so this cannot ever happen again. No good community citizen would ever allow this to happen to its people in any regard. Thank you for your time, a truly concerned citizen. There's a number of additional comments that I will share with you. I have a letter here.
That's time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Ms. Kathleen Fraser. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Fraser, and I'm the Clean Air Associate with Environment Texas, a nonprofit advocate for clean air, clean water, and open spaces. I'm here to speak against the proposed penalty for the TPC Port Neches plant. Today, Environment Texas is releasing our annual report on illegal air pollution in Texas. Our research found that the TPC Port Neches plant is the second worst polluter for butadiene in the entire state of Texas, illegally emitting over 14,000 pounds of butadiene in 2018. We know that butadiene can cause cancer and that there's no safe level of exposure to it. The TPC facility has a track record of violating the Clean Air Act, with 5 other illegal emissions events just in 2019, in addition to the 2018 violations we're discussing today. Your staff proposed a fine of roughly $44,000 for the TPC Port Neches plant, a slap on the wrist for a plant that consistently violates our clean air laws, threatening the health and safety of nearby communities. Given your ability to fine companies $25,000 a day per pollutant, a six-figure enforcement action is both possible and warranted. Environment Texas's report also more broadly examines illegal air pollution events and enforcement actions at industrial facilities in Texas. Despite over 4,500 illegal air emissions events in Texas in 2018, only 1% of those events were penalized by the TCEQ, making it easier for polluters to pollute our air and endanger our citizens. Texans are sick and tired of oil refineries and petrochemical plants catching fire, exploding, and pumping out harmful air pollution. And the data show the problem is getting worse, not better. We need our state leaders to crack down on illegal polluters and to stop putting the interests of those polluters ahead of the rest of us. That's why today I'm calling on you to reject the proposed enforcement action and direct staff to negotiate tougher penalties or to take TPC to court. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser. Jamie Lawson. Mr. Lawson. Is it Sema Hernandez? Sema Hernandez? No? Yvette Ariano? Would you like to come up together? Yes, of course. Good morning.
Good morning. Chairman, Commissioners, Executive Director, and Public Interest Counsel. For the record, my name is Isabelle Segata Trevino, and I'm here on behalf of Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services based in Houston, Texas. With me is Yvette Arellano, and I'll speak first, and then she'll speak. This agreed order illustrates several deficiencies with TCEQ's enforcement program that create little incentive for violators to follow environmental laws. These include delay in the enforcement process, discounts for repeat offenders, and a penalty cap. I will discuss the delay, and my counterpart Yvette here will discuss discounts and the penalty cap. This order includes violations dating back to January 2018, meaning that the Commission approves this order nearly 2 years after the violation occurred. Enforcement actions are supposed to serve as a deterrent for polluters. While TCP has completed a number of the corrective actions in the order and technical requirements as well, outstanding remains a technical requirement to prevent the recurrence of emission events due to the same or similar causes as there's two incidents, incident 282.066 and 291.251. Incident 282.066 involved a flaring event caused by a power failure, precisely one of the types of failures TCP TPC experienced during the recent fires and explosions. In the recent fire, this failure prevented TPC from pumping firewater from the storage ponds of its wastewater treatment facility, and this precipitated disastrous conditions at the plant. If the Commission's enforcement process were better streamlined and faster to penalize violators, TPC may have conducted a root cause analysis based on this order long ago and implemented better policies and procedures that might have avoided the recent chemical disaster, or at least lessened its impact. The unacceptable delay in this enforcement order also illustrates a lack of prioritization in enforcement actions in areas of concentrated operations, like the Houston Ship Channel and surrounding communities, as commenters will discuss later in this meeting in the public comment session. Thank you. Yvette will now discuss the two remaining issues.
Thank you, and I'll ask the chief clerk to reset the clock. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name's Yvette Arellano, and I represent Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services based in East Houston. I'm here because I'm also a member of the fence line community. TPC received a 20% discount on their penalty for expedited settlement for simply coming into compliance with permit terms and nothing more. This arbitrary discount serves to further dilute the deterrent value of TCEQ enforcement orders. The discount or deferral, as the TCEQ calls it, is written into TCEQ's penalty policy. In its latest iteration, the 2014 penalty policy is an agency document subject to refinement. In the next planning and revision cycle of the penalty policy, the TCEQ should remove the 20% deferral for expedited settlement for 1660 administrative orders with no culpability enhancement. Lastly, and most debilitating for the TCEQ's enforcement program, the statutorily mandated penalty enhancement cap found at Texas Water Code Section 5.754. The penalty cap prevents the Commission from enhancing a penalty commensurate with a compliance history. Here, TPC's compliance history is poor enough to earn it a 205% enhancement on penalty, but this enhancement is capped at 100% by statute. TPC's penalty is $44,603, but it should have been $76,365.50. TCEQ should recommend the Texas legislature abolish this penalty cap. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Ariano. Cyrus Reed. Dr. Reed, before we get started, let me thank you for volunteering with the tax group that was on our.
How old am I going to be in 2023? That's all I have to say. Yeah, it's a great committee, and I'm honored to serve on it.
Thank you for serving.
Cyrus Reed with Sierra Club Lone Star Chapter. Obviously, I do not live in the community. I don't live in Port Arthur, Port Neches, and I urge you to listen to what folks have to say from those communities. I will say, as a representative of Sierra Club, that Sierra Club, Environment Texas, and a number of the other groups through the years have had to rely on citizen enforcement suits because we believe both the EPA and TCEQ have failed to do their job, and I think those have been well documented. And because of that citizen enforcement suits, we've been able to clean up a lot of pollution in communities. So I'm going to urge you not to rely on Environment Texas or Sierra Club to clean this facility up. And I do think the agreed order before you, as has been discussed by people who are actually lawyers, and I'm not a lawyer, is somewhat embarrassing. $55,000 reduced to $44,000, reduced to $22,000 with the SEP for a company that's had ongoing violations on not exactly the same issue, but similar issues. And as the previous person who testified made note of, because of this cap, even though you've seen this company multiple times, you weren't able, your policy does not allow you to give a more substantial penalty than otherwise you could be. I would add to that, you guys are going to be looking at, I believe it's called your EIC, your penalty policy over the next year. I would urge you to revisit it and expand it. I would also, in addition to urge, not to defray costs or put a cap on the enhancement penalty, I think it's time for the legislature to look at that overall $25,000 maximum penalty. EPA is now well beyond that in their own. They've adjusted it through the years. The legislature last adjusted in 2011. I know you'll be going through sunset soon enough, but it may be time now, given all the disasters we're seeing, to really give yourselves a bigger tool so that companies take the communities more seriously than they've been taken, as we've seen particularly in these last couple of years. So I would urge you to reject what's before you, send it on to the Attorney General as part of a larger package. But if you're not, I also urge you to look at your penalty policy and also work with the legislature to give you more tools so we don't have to keep coming back here and we don't have to keep doing citizen lawsuits because the agency either doesn't want to do its job or doesn't have the tools to do its job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. That brings us, I think, to the end of the list of folks who wanted to comment. Let me say, first of all, I appreciate all of the comments. In particular, I want to thank the community members who live near the facility for being here in person, and thank you for your powerful testimony. It's important that we hear these stories, and no better place to do that than in this forum. So thank you for making the trip, and thank you for telling us your stories. Colleagues, any questions or comments at this point? And let me note, too, that Ms. Aileen Hooks, attorney for, here we go, attorney for TPC, is present if there are any questions for TPC.
I don't think I have any particular questions at this time.
No questions for her.
All right, I have nothing else at this point, so Mr. McWhorter, comment on anything that you've heard and also on the enforcement docket generally.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to thank the people that came and shared their experiences today. I think it's very important that we all hear those experiences, and I'm confident that those thoughts and observations about the penalty policy and statutory caps and all things related to penalties will be considered by everyone here going forward. With respect to the immediate docket, item 15 and all the other items on the enforcement docket, my office has reviewed these items and we determined that they do comply with the existing penalty policy, and we recommend moving forward with approval of these particular orders. But again, keeping in mind the things everyone has said as far as moving forward to shaping policy and law applicable to these actions.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Colleagues, I think we should move forward on this package with the exception of item 15. My recommendation would be to remand that to the executive director with instructions to refer it to the Attorney General's office so that the Attorney General can take a comprehensive approach to this enforcement action. I'd like to gather up your thoughts on that proposal, and if you agree, I will offer a motion.
I'm in agreement. I appreciate the discussion today. I'll just comment and say, when these violations occurred in 2018, I think at that time the executive director calculated the penalty appropriate. But we're here today, and there have been recent events, and we have to take those seriously. And so, keeping that in mind, I support your idea of a motion of remanding it to the executive director, not approving what's before us today, and with a potential referral to the AG, if that's how you described it, or a direction
my
to
motion would be to direct the executive director to refer it to the Attorney General's office.
support that as well. And just so the people that traveled up here today know that, our agency took this event very seriously, and we had employees that were working all Thanksgiving Day as well. And while we have employees down in that area that I can't speak to specifically how they were affected, but they were affected as well. And so we're very cognizant of the event. And I'll stop there.
Mr. Janeka.
Thank you. I think I am in complete agreement with your thoughts on the motion that you're contemplating, and I'll just say a couple of thoughts. I'm 3 months and 2 days into this job, and I've begun a lot of conversations with a lot of stakeholders across this area of the state's economy that we regulate, and this case brings up a lot of. It's a great example of a lot of particular concerns that I've heard from a variety of stakeholders. One is the necessarily long length of time it takes to handle complaints, dispense with them, investigate them, give full opportunity for participation by the affected entity in the process, and that I think is on clear display here. This is an order that was, or a series of violations that an agreement had been reached between TPC and the executive director even a month or more before the unfortunate incident that happened recently. And that, in a very unique way, puts an unrelated matter before us that is still, I think, directly tangential. And it's one point that Mr. Beard made a comment that I think was a very, very well taken point, and that is, based off of his experience in the petrochemical industry, he's observed that small violations, small events often lead to and precipitate a larger one. And to that point specifically, I was inclined to take a closer look at this item and consider referring it back to the executive director for further development, if only to consider whether these violations had any potential causal chain, or may have suggested a pattern that could have led to some larger course correction that's needed on the part of the company. So I think in that vein, I'm very much in agreement, and I think that the most appropriate way to proceed is the course you're suggesting, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner.